Today, we're going to talk about green tea. In its simplest sense, green tea is made up of tea leaves that have been plucked from the tea plant, withered, fixed, and then dried. It's a lot to unpack here. I get it. But let's jump right in with withering. Withering is a process used in tea production to prepare the leaves for further processing. It's a process that allows the leaves to soften. If you were to just pluck leaves from a tea plant and try to roll them or manipulate them anyway, they'll begin to just break apart. The withering process in tea production allows the leaves to soften, and this is done by literally just laying the leaves out in a thin layer. Some factories have withering troughs that are indoors. Some folks just do it outdoors on a tarp. There are a number of ways a tea producer can choose to wither their tea leaves, but the withering step prepares the leaves for future processing. And shortly thereafter in the green tea process, we go into a process called fixing. And what does that mean? Essentially, fixing is a process that halts oxidation. But we're gonna just pause here and talk about oxidation for a minute. You're familiar with this from other things like an apple. If you cut open an apple, it begins to turn brown. If you heat an apple, let's say like bake an apple pie, well, the apples aren't brown in apple pie. Why? Because you've denatured the enzymes responsible for oxidation in the heating process. And this same thing occurs in tea production. The leaves, once they're withered and ready for the fixing stage, are heated. And when they're heated, they no longer are on their path to turn brown. And when I say turn brown or oxidize, think like black teas or any of the leaves that you see that are dark in color. They have been allowed to oxidize. Any tea leaves that you see that are yellowish, greenish, dark green even, have been fixed to prevent further oxidation. And with green teas, there are really two mechanisms for doing this. The first one is steaming. A lot of Japanese green teas, some Chinese green teas utilize steaming to fix the tea leaves. And because this is such like an instantaneous process, the steaming just really stops that oxidation very quickly. You're left with leaves that are very dark green. I mean, here's an example of a sencha. Here's a gyokuro. You notice that they are very, very dark. Other teas may utilize pan firing to halt oxidation, such as Longjing from China or Biluchun from China. And that results in a tea that isn't as dark green because it's oxidized ever so slightly during that fixing process. What you have in the end is teas that are steamed typically are more vegetal in nature. You might get like a grassy vegetal note from a Japanese green tea and maybe a deep umami flavor. With some of the pan-fired teas, they're a little more nutty in character and very different from a steam tea. That this is just an exploration of the depth of tea flavors you can get inside a single tea category. Let's take a look at some of the world's famous green teas. And for that, I'm going to refer to my book, Tea User's Guide. This is the well-worn copy that is usually somewhere floating around our kitchen. But this book was really made to be a reference. Like, I want to see these beat to hell underneath of a coffee shop or tea shop counter where people are like using it as a reference manual. That was the idea. That's why it's this size. That's why it's not a coffee table book. But anywho, let's go to the green tea chapter. So I'm just going to read you some highlights on green tea because I do not have encyclopedic memory. Green teas from Japan, typically steamed. There are variants that are not steamed, but they're even classified by the length of the steaming process. There's some deep steamed and light steamed teas. So for example, asamushi is a shallow steam or a light steam, typically like a 20 to 40 second steaming process there. Then you move up to chumushi, and this is a medium steam, which refers to anywhere from 40 to 80 seconds in the steaming process. Then we move up to futsumushi, which is a normal steam. And this time kind of varies for each producer. I mean, all of these do. It's really just a continuum, and always remember that with tea. There really are no absolutes. There are a lot of continuums that we're going to be talking about. And then a deep steam. And this one really packs a punch, gives you really deep umami flavors. A deep steam refers to a longer steaming, usually 80 seconds or more. And that actually starts to break down the leaf a little bit because it's so long. That's the steaming process in Japan. And what you get from that, you've got some famous teas that you may have heard of if you're a fan of Japanese teas. You have bancha, which is kind of like a lower grade tea. Sencha, arguably the most famous Japanese green tea. You've got kabusecha, which is a tea that is shaded while it's grown to increase some of the aroma in the leaf. And then gyokuro. And gyokuro leaves they're shaded for about 3 weeks before being harvested, and this shading increases the concentration of amino acid and decreases the concentration of polyphenols in the leaves, resulting in a less astringent tea with a more umami taste. So that's Japan. There's a lot more. I mean, we could even talk about matcha. Matcha is made from ground tencha. But let's go to China. There's some really good famous green teas from China. You know, one of my favorites is Anji Bai Cha, beautiful tea from Zhejiang province. Longjing, otherwise known as Dragon Well, one of the most famous pan-fired Chinese teas. Luan Guapian, that's from Anhui, another beautiful green tea from China. Possibly one of the craziest looking leaves you'll ever see, Taiping Ho Kui. And this tea is made from leaves that are plucked and rolled and almost flattened. And then they are dried and they arrive in this flattened form. They're actually really difficult to steep because you don't want to crunch them up and they're difficult to fit into any sort of infuser, but they look pretty cool, right? Dongting Bilu Chun, one of the most famous Chinese green teas on the market today. These teas are not, relegated to China and Japan. They're arguably the most famous producers of green tea, but almost every tea producing nation has their form of green tea. And there are so many different variants within the category. But all you really need to know and take away from this video is that the leaves are fixed. The fixing process is something that halts that oxidation, maintains greenness and vegetal characteristics of that leaf, and prevents it from future oxidation. Because of this, green teas, really fresh green teas, they're the teas that are going to lose their life the quickest. A lot of people ask me, how long can you keep teas before they go bad? Well, teas don't really ever go bad. I mean, you can age certain types of tea for years and years and years, and nothing will really happen to them. And if they're stored correctly, they're stored incorrectly, and you're dealing with mold and mildew, then that's a whole different story. But if kept free from sunlight, in an airtight vessel, in a cool temperature, they're going to last indefinitely. But I will tell you, green teas stand to lose the most of their aroma and body over time, if not stored correctly. I think that a lot of other teas like white teas, oolong teas, black teas sometimes, and fermented teas, they can actually change and get better over time if stored correctly. But green teas, in my opinion, stand to lose the most character. There are exceptions to everything. I did just open a few weeks ago with a friend of mine a vacuum sealed package of 23-year-old green tea, and it was awesome. It had its aroma, but it was vacuum sealed and it had an oxygen absorber packet in it, and it was in a very small package. So that's an example of an exception here. But remember, your takeaway is green tea leaves are green because they were heated during the process of making that tea, and that's what resulted in that green color of the leaf when it reached your doors. It didn't continue to oxidize, and that's what ultimately determines the character in the cup. So feel free to take a look at my Patreon page where I have a chart that outlines how all teas are processed, and we'll dig into each tea type in subsequent videos. But thank you so much for watching this video. Please hit subscribe below, and I'll see you next time. Thank you.